I was just a payment, I reminded the Mafia boss, until he made me the most powerful woman in the city. The faint scent of night-blooming jasmine, my silent laboratory partner, usually anchored me, a sweet, verdant breath against the city's harsh exhale. Tonight, even its familiar perfume felt like a mockery. My hands, stained with earth and chlorophyll, trembled not from cold, but from the raw, sickening dread that clawed at my throat. Across the scarred oak table, under the dim glow of my reading lamp, lay a single, neatly folded document. It wasn't just paper. It was a guillotine, poised over my father's neck, and by extension, my own. Debt. A word as mundane as it was deadly. Father, a brilliant man whose head was perpetually in the clouds of archaic texts and forgotten languages, had made a series of spectacularly bad choices. Choices that now entangled us with the most dangerous name whispered in the city's shadows, Don Mateo Torrance. A fortune, the paper stated, a life-saving fortune, for a life that had long since withered into self-pity and neglect. My life savings, painstakingly accumulated from my small botanical clinic, were a joke against the sum. There was no escape. I ran a thumb over the crisp edge of the document, the texture like dried snakeskin. My clinic, my sanctuary, my delicate glass vials of healing tinctures and potent poultices, all of it suddenly felt gossamer thin, ready to shred at the first gust of Mateo's wrath. I was not a woman who believed in monsters, but the stories about the Don were visceral, etched into the city's concrete. He didn't just break men, he erased them, and my father had owed him. The thought twisted my stomach into a knot. A shrill, insistent ring shattered the fragile quiet. Not my phone, but the bell above the clinic door, pulled open with a violent swing that rattled the glass panes. My breath hitched. The air in the room thickened, suddenly heavy with ozone and menace. 2 men filled the doorway, blocking out the sliver of city light that usually filtered in. They weren't just big. They were monuments of muscle and contained violence, clad in suits that somehow managed to look both impeccable and menacing, like expensive shrouds. Their eyes, flat and devoid of warmth, swept over my carefully organized shelves of dried herbs, over the ancient copper kettle that always simmered with some restorative brew. They dismissed my life, my world, in a single cold glance. I felt a primal urge to shrink, to disappear behind the towering dried lavender bundles. But a deeper, more stubborn part of me refused. I had spent my life nurturing growth, coaxing life from the soil. I wouldn't wither so easily. Alessia Ricci, the voice was a low growl, rumbling from the throat of the man on the right, whose face was a patchwork of old scars. His gaze settled on the document on my table, then on me. He already knew. They always did. I met his stare, forcing my chin higher. That's me. My voice, to my own surprise, didn't crack. It was thin but steady. A scientist's voice, precise even in terror. The scarred man took a step forward, his shadow falling across my table, eclipsing the debt notice. Don Torrance requires your immediate presence. He didn't ask. He commanded. His hand, large and calloused, moved with predatory grace toward my arm. My skin crawled, but I pulled back before his fingers could connect. For what purpose? I knew the answer, of course, but denial was a thin, comforting shield. A flicker, almost imperceptible, of something like impatience crossed the scarred man's face. The Don is unwell. Your particular skills have been deemed necessary. Unwell. The word sounded absurd coming from him, a man who exuded unbreakable health, but it aligned with the whispers I'd caught on the street, the strange silence that had fallen over certain parts of the city. Mateo Torrance, the untouchable, was rumored to be dying. My blood ran cold, a new kind of fear replacing the old. Dying from what? And why me? My specialty was botanical medicine, not miraculous resurrection. I need to prepare a bag, I stated, my mind racing. A quick calculation, a rapid triage of my situation. Resistance here was futile. It would only make things worse for my father. But I wouldn't go without my tools. My survival instinct, honed from years of coaxing stubborn seeds to sprout, kicked in. The scarred man nodded, a curt, economical movement. You have 5 minutes. Nothing more, 5 minutes. It wasn't enough, but it would have to be. I scrambled to my feet, my movement stiff, as if my joints had rusted. My eyes swept over my clinic, the place I had built with my own hands, piece by piece. My carefully labeled jars, my mortar and pestle worn smooth with use. The faint, comforting aroma of lavender and sage that clung to the air. This was my world, orderly and predictable. I was being ripped from it, violently. I snatched my worn leather satchel, the one I always carried on foraging trips, and began to fill it. Obsidian knives for precise cuts, a small ceramic grinder, vials of potent extracts, feverfew for migraines, valerian for anxiety, a concentrated dose of activated charcoal, and my strongest pain-relieving poultice, a secret blend of comfrey and willow bark. Each item felt like a tiny defiance, a piece of myself I was dragging into the maw of the unknown. They might take me, but they wouldn't take my craft. A harsh voice cut through the sterile quiet. "Time's up!" My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird. I slung the satchel over my shoulder, the weight of it a small comfort. My gaze lingered on a potted rosemary, its spiky leaves exuding resilience. Strength, I thought. Remember strength. The men flanked me, their bodies forming an impenetrable wall. They didn't touch me, but their proximity was a physical pressure, a silent warning. I was being escorted, not led, out the door, into the biting night air, where a sleek black sedan idled at the curb. Its tinted windows reflected the streetlights like obsidian eyes. The ride was a blur of muted luxury and oppressive silence. The city lights became a streaky, indistinct canvas as we sped through the familiar streets, turning them into a foreign landscape. Each passing block felt like another thread snipped, severing me from my life, from all I knew. My fingers tightened on the strap of my satchel, knuckles white. The cold dread had solidified into a heavy stone in my gut. I tried to focus, to analyze, to do anything but succumb to panic. What poison could bring down Mateo Torrance? What obscure antidote would I be expected to concoct? My mind, trained for scientific inquiry, searched for data points, for a logical path, but found only dark unknowns. We finally pulled up to a towering skyscraper, its top disappearing into the low-hanging clouds. It wasn't just a building. It was a fortress, radiating an aura of impenetrable power. Armed guards, silent and efficient, materialized from the shadows, their eyes scanning our car, then me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, a healer, was being brought to a place of ultimate destruction, a palace built on fear. Inside, the opulence was staggering, almost aggressive. Polished marble gleamed under a cascade of crystal chandeliers. Artworks that looked priceless hung on walls of darkest wood, illuminated by recessed lighting. It was cold, beautiful, and utterly devoid of warmth. I imagined Mateo Torrance existing here, a spider at the center of a perfectly constructed deadly web. The thought made my skin prickle. We ascended in a private elevator, its movement so smooth it was almost imperceptible. The higher we climbed, the more my ears popped, and the more distant my old life felt. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. What waited for me at the top? A monster I had braced myself for. A ruthless tyrant, whose casual cruelty could break a person. The doors slid open with a soft sigh. A hushed corridor stretched before us, carpeted in deep pile that swallowed every sound. The air here was different, too. Heavy, almost medicinal, with a strange, cloying sweetness underneath. A scent I couldn't quite place. It clung to the air, whispering of illness and something else, something I couldn't yet identify. The scarred man led me to a set of heavy, dark wood doors. He pushed them open without knocking, revealing a vast, dimly lit master suite. My eyes widened, adjusting to the gloom. The room was immense, easily larger than my entire clinic. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, glittering panorama of the city below, but the heavy drapes were mostly drawn, casting the space in perpetual twilight. And in the center of it all, on a sprawling bed draped in dark, rich fabrics, lay the Don. He was not what I had expected. Not the hulking beast of my imagination. Not the unfeeling monster. He was ravaged. His skin, usually tanned and formidable, was slick with sweat, drawn taut over the sharp angles of his cheekbones. A sheen of fever glazed his eyes, which were open, staring at the ceiling, but unfocused, lost in some private hell. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and his lips were dry, cracked. Even in this weakened state, the sheer force of him was undeniable. A dangerous, coiled intensity emanated from him, even as his body battled itself. My gaze swept over the room, taking in the details. A bedside table cluttered with discarded IV lines, half-empty glasses of water, and an array of pharmaceutical bottles. None of them, I noted instantly, looked particularly effective for a rare poison. There was a faint aroma, too, that unsettling, sweet medicinal tang, but with a new, sharper metallic note beneath it, like blood. Mateo stirred, a low moan escaping his lips. His head rolled sluggishly on the pillows, and his eyes, dark as polished obsidian, found me. Even clouded by fever, they held a dangerous intelligence, a predatory glint that made my stomach clench. A shiver, not of cold but of something far more primal, ran down my spine. This was the man who held my father's life in his hands, who had ripped me from my quiet existence, and he was dying. "She's here, Dawn," the scarred man rumbled, his voice startlingly loud in the room's suffocating quiet. Mateo didn't acknowledge him. His gaze remained fixed on me, intense and unwavering, as if he saw not just Alessia Ricci, herbalist, but something else entirely. Something crucial. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He looked like a predator caught in a trap, wounded but still capable of lashing out with deadly force. I forced myself to move, crossing the plush carpet toward the bed. My scientific mind, usually so detached, felt a strange pull. This wasn't just a powerful man. This was a patient in profound distress. My training, my life's purpose, compelled me to act. "What exactly is his condition?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, turning to a gaunt-faced doctor who hovered near the foot of the bed, clearly out of his depth. The doctor wrung his hands. "We don't know for certain. It's a highly unusual toxidrome. Intense pain, neurological deficits, severe cardiac strain. Standard antidotes have been ineffective. He's deteriorating rapidly." My eyes flicked back to Mateo. His jaw was clenched, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble. His hands, large and surprisingly elegant, were fisted in the sheets. A spasm rippled through his body, making him arch his back. A guttural groan tore from his throat, raw and agonizing. It was the sound of a man fighting a losing battle against his own flesh. "Tell me the symptoms in detail," I commanded, my voice gaining strength as my professional instincts took over. I needed information, specific data. This wasn't just my father's dead anymore. This was a puzzle, a deadly, fascinating puzzle. As the doctor recounted the horrifying progression of Mateo's illness, I pulled out my small magnifying glass and pen light. I leaned over Mateo, ignoring the men who watched from the periphery, ignoring the thrumming fear in my own veins. I needed to see. His skin was clammy, yet hot to the touch. His pupils, when I directed the pen light, were dilated, sluggish. I noted the faint discoloration around his fingernails, a subtle cyanosis, and the rapid, thready pulse beneath his skin. My nose wrinkled. That cloying sweetness in the air. It was almond, I realized with a jolt. Bitter almond. And something else. A deeper metallic tang. Cyanide, my mind screamed the word. But a slow-acting variant or a combination. This wasn't a simple case. This was an assassin's art. Another, more violent spasm seized Mateo. He thrashed, his body arching, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes, though still feverish, locked onto mine with a desperate, animalistic intensity. His hand shot out, not toward my throat as I half expected, but toward my wrist. His fingers clamped down, hot and impossibly strong despite his weakness, digging into the soft flesh of my inner arm. His grip wasn't a threat. It was a desperate plea, a drowning man clutching the only solid thing he could find. My breath hitched. The heat of his skin, the tremor running through his massive frame, the sheer, raw agony etched on his face. It was overwhelming. Everything in me screamed to pull away, to escape this dangerous, sick man, but some traitorous part of me, the part that had dedicated her life to healing, to soothing pain, found itself unable to move. His feverish grip was a tether, not just for him, but for me. It pulled me into his orbit, made me acknowledge his suffering not just as a medical problem, but as a human one. "Pain," he rasped, his voice a ragged whisper, his eyes dark pools of torment boring into mine. "Make it stop," my heart squeezed. This was not the monster I had anticipated. This was a man stripped bare by suffering, his formidable control shattered by an unseen enemy. My medical bag suddenly felt heavy with the weight of expectation, of a life hanging in the balance. I had to help him. I had to. I need proper light, I declared, my voice cutting through the tension. And privacy. Everyone else out. I looked directly at the scarred man, whose expression remained impassive, but who, to my surprise, simply nodded. The doctor, relieved, scurried out, followed by the two silent guards. Only the scarred man, whose name I still didn't know, remained, positioned by the door, a silent sentinel. Mateo's grip on my wrist tightened, a searing brand against my skin. I pulled my satchel closer, reaching for the small vial of my strongest pain-relieving extract, a potent distillation of white willow bark and devil's claw. It wouldn't cure him, but it might offer a moment of reprieve, enough to give me time to think, to formulate a true antidote. I need hot water, I instructed the remaining guard, my voice crisp, betraying none of the internal turmoil that raged within me. A basin, clean cloths, and quiet. Absolute quiet. He nodded, disappearing with surprising speed. I was alone with Mateo, tethered to him by his desperate, feverish grip. His eyes remained locked on mine, a silent conversation passing between us. He was watching me, observing my every move, even through the haze of pain, and I, in turn, was studying him, a dangerous, fascinating specimen of humanity, teetering on the precipice. The guard returned quickly, placing the requested items on a nearby table. I carefully measured out a dose of the extract, mixing it with a small amount of warm water. As I offered the glass to Mateo, he released my wrist, his fingers still brushing against my skin, sending a jolt through me. His gaze remained intense, wary, yet tinged with a desperate hope. He drank, his throat working convulsively. A moment later, his eyes fluttered closed, a ragged sigh escaping his lips as the worst of the pain began to recede, just slightly. He was still in agony, but the edges were dulled. I began to work, a quiet hum of scientific focus overriding my fear. I prepared a cool compress, wiping the sweat from his brow, feeling the bone and muscle beneath my fingertips. My touch was clinical, yet oddly intimate in the hushed room. He stirred, his eyelids fluttering open, his gaze finding mine again. This time there was something new in his eyes, a flicker of something beyond pain. Recognition. Curiosity. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice stronger now, though still hoarse. The words were a demand, not a question. "Alessia Ricci," I replied, my voice steady, as I continued to gently wipe his face. "Your doctor," he scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "My doctors are useless. You are different." His gaze swept over my face, lingering, dissecting. A possessive glint, even in his weakened state, sparked in the depths of his eyes. "I'm a botanist," I corrected, keeping my voice neutral. "An herbalist. I heal with nature." A slow, humorless smile touched his lips, a chilling contrast to his pallid complexion. "Nature," he murmured, the word tasting dangerous on his tongue. "My kind of language. Tell me, Alessia Ricci, can you heal what poisons a king?" "I can try," I replied, my chin lifting. "But I need time, and information, the exact nature of the poison." He studied me, his eyes sharp, calculating, even as his body trembled from residual pain. "Time you have," he said, his voice dropping, imbued with a sudden, steel-like authority that cut through the haze of his illness. "And information will be provided. Consider it a down payment for your father's unfortunate business dealings." My breath caught. He wasn't just acknowledging my father's debt. He was confirming it, using it as a leash. The rescue was indeed a trap. I was not a temporary guest. I was now his property, his instrument, bound by invisible chains forged from my father's folly. He had solved my immediate problem, yes, but only by pulling me deeper into his suffocating world. My stomach plummeted. "I will require a fully equipped laboratory," I stated, pushing down the rising panic, asserting my expertise, my only leverage. Specific compounds, rare herbs. I'll need access to resources, and I'll need to work without interference. He closed his eyes, a flicker of something almost like amusement on his pain-ravaged face. "Consider it done. Anything you need." His voice was a low rumble, filled with an unsettling certainty. Then his eyes snapped open again, fixing on mine, burning with an almost feral intensity. "But know this, Alessia Ricci. You will not leave this penthouse until I am healed. And perhaps, Not even then. My blood ran cold. The unspoken promise in his words was a terrifying revelation. I wasn't just here to heal him. I was here to be consumed by his dark world. He didn't ask me to stay. He simply declared it. And in that declaration, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my life, as I had known it, was over. I was trapped, and the man who held me captive, the man I was now bound to heal, had just begun to awaken. The realization settled over me, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and a strange, bewildering fascination. Trapped. The word echoed in the cavernous penthouse, ricocheting off the expensive walls, solidifying my new reality. My quiet clinic, my meticulously ordered world, felt 1,000,000 miles away. A fragile dream from which I'd been brutally roused. My fingers, still tingling from Mateo's feverish grip, clenched involuntarily. Every instinct screamed for escape, for the open sky and the smell of clean earth. Yet, a peculiar lethargy held me rooted beside his bed. A strange pull drawing me into the orbit of this dying, dangerous man. I spent the rest of the night in a haze of professional duty and mounting dread. Mateo drifted in and out of a restless sleep, punctuated by sharp, involuntary tremors and soft, pained moans. I monitored his pulse, his respiration, the subtle shifts in his skin tone. The faint, bitter almond scent, that telltale sign of cyanide, remained, stubbornly clinging to the air around him. It was a complex poison, I concluded, likely a slow-release compound, carefully titrated to inflict maximum agony and eventual demise, not an instantaneous kill. A deliberate, horrifying artistry. My mind, ever the scientist, found itself detachedly intrigued by the venom's intricate design, even as my gut churned with revulsion for its purpose. As the pre-dawn light began to bruise the edges of the city skyline, painting the distant skyscrapers in hues of bruised purple and pale gray, I prepared a fresh poultice of feverfew and willow bark, crushing the damp leaves with methodical precision. The dull thud of the mortar and pestle was the only sound in the opulent room, a stark contrast to the thrum of the city stirring outside. Mateo's breathing had deepened, the painful spasms less frequent. The pain reliever had bought him some respite, and me, a fragile window of opportunity. My gaze drifted over him as I worked. Even in repose, a raw power emanated from him. His features, though softened by sleep and illness, retained a formidable cast. The dark stubble on his jaw, the heavy arch of his brows, the sensual curve of his lips, all bespoke a man accustomed to command. He was dangerously beautiful, like a wild, wounded animal. An absurd thought, considering the circumstances, but one that stubbornly lodged itself in my mind. When the first rays of full morning sunlight finally pierced through the gap in the heavy drapes, washing the room in a cold, clinical light, a new guard, a younger man with equally unsmiling eyes, entered quietly, carrying a tray. A simple breakfast, fresh fruit, strong coffee, and a plate of scrambled eggs. He placed it on a small, polished table near the window, then retreated to stand by the door, a silent, unmoving fixture. My hunger, long ignored, suddenly roared to life. I ate quickly, efficiently, my eyes constantly flicking back to Mateo, still lost in a drugged sleep. The morning unfolded into a strange, unsettling routine. I administered herbal teas, applied cooling compresses, and gently massaged the taut muscles in his neck and shoulders, trying to coax out the residual tension from his body. My hands, once accustomed to the delicate roots of plants, now moved over the hot, resilient landscape of his skin. Each touch, clinical as it was a transgression, a crossing of an invisible boundary. I felt the tremor of his muscles beneath my fingertips, the subtle shift of his weight as I adjusted his pillows. His smell, a mix of fever, expensive cologne, and something musky and inherently masculine, infiltrated my senses, becoming intimately familiar. He woke slowly, his eyes still clouded by fever, focusing on me with that same unsettling intensity. "Alessia," he rasped. The single word a low growl, both a demand and a recognition. "Good morning, Don Torrance," I replied, my voice cool, professional. I refused to let the intimacy of the past hours fray my composure. "The fever has broken slightly. The pain, is it manageable?" He shifted, testing his body, a faint grimace touching his lips. "Manageable," he conceded, the word grudgingly given. "For now." His gaze swept over the room, then back to me, sharper, more aware than it had been. "You stayed. You gave me little choice," I stated, a prickle of defiance rising. "And I don't abandon a patient." A slow, humorless smile played on his lips, a chilling flash of the monster beneath the man. "Admirable. And foolish." His eyes, however, held a curious glint, as if my defiance pleased him. "My men informed me you requested a laboratory. Your demands will be met. Down the hall, second door on the left. It's fully stocked. Anything you require, simply inform the guard." A spark of hope ignited within me, quickly followed by a cold dose of reality. A fully equipped lab, a botanist's dream. But it was here, within his gilded cage. And what about the specific compounds? "The rare herbs I mentioned? They are being sourced," he affirmed, his voice betraying no emotion. "Anything to expedite my recovery. Your success, Alessia, directly correlates to your father's continued well-being." The words were delivered with a casual cruelty that stole my breath. He didn't need to elaborate. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a steel thread tying my father's life to my efforts. My stomach clenched. He was offering me everything, but at the cost of my freedom, and with the constant terrifying reminder of the leverage he held. It was psychological warfare, subtly waged even from his sickbed. Everything in me screamed to refuse, to rail against the injustice, but the image of my father, frail and utterly helpless, flashed before my eyes. I swallowed, forcing myself to nod. Understood. I busied myself with preparing a new, more potent tincture, my hands moving with practiced efficiency. This was my leverage now, my skill. I would prove indispensable. I had to. Later that afternoon, a flurry of controlled activity erupted in the penthouse. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, hushed voices murmuring. Matteo, propped up against several pillows, his color still pale but his eyes now sharp and fully alert, accepted a sleek tablet from the new guard. He dismissed the man with a curt nod, his attention immediately captured by the glowing screen. I was across the room, meticulously organizing the new botanical supplies that had arrived. An impressive array of rare leaves, barks, and powdered roots, all labeled with surprising accuracy. The sight of these precious ingredients should have filled me with professional satisfaction, but the unsettling reality of their procurement, undoubtedly by Matteo's network, made them feel tainted. Suddenly, Matteo's voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the quiet. "Anton," my head snapped up. Anton, one of the two men who had brought me here. The scarred one entered, his face impassive. "Tell our friend," Matteo began, his voice devoid of all warmth, utterly flat, that the message was received. His attempt was noted. His eyes, dark as midnight, held a dangerous gleam. "Inform him that his enterprise in the North Sector will cease to exist by morning, and his family will find their businesses unexpectedly difficult to operate. Permanently." The words were delivered with a calm, almost detached precision that chilled me to the bone. No anger, no raised voice, just cold, calculated malice. Anton merely nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the chilling command. He turned to leave, his movements as economical and ruthless as his master's words. My breath hitched. My hands holding a delicate sprig of digitalis trembled. This was the monster. This was the man who could erase livelihoods, extinguish futures with a casual word. The ruthlessness was absolute, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. The world outside this penthouse, I realized with a sickening lurch, was not just dangerous. It was predatory, and Matteo Torrance was its apex. A wave of nausea washed over me. Anton disappeared, the heavy doors closing with a soft thud, leaving only the oppressive silence in his wake. I stood frozen, the digitalis clutched in my hand, its potent, deadly beauty a stark mirror to the scene I had just witnessed. Matteo's gaze, I felt, shifted. It settled on me, burning with an almost physical weight. I forced myself to meet his eyes, refusing to flinch, though every fiber of my being wanted to shrink away. His expression was unreadable, a blank canvas of dark intensity. "You find my methods disagreeable?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble, the faintest hint of challenge in its depths. "They are effective," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I chose my words carefully, walking a perilous tightrope between honesty and survival. "But they are not mine." A slow smile, dangerous and utterly captivating, spread across his lips. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from him, and it did nothing to assuage my fear. If anything, it magnified his menace. "No, Alessia Ricci," he agreed, his gaze softening, shifting into something unsettlingly possessive. "They are not, which is precisely why you are here. My world is harsh. You," he added, his eyes tracing the line of my jaw, "are not." He paused, his stare unwavering, and then, in a voice that dropped to a low, intimate murmur, he continued, "But you are safe here, within these walls. With me, no one will touch you, no one will threaten you. You are under my protection." The words, meant as reassurance, felt like chains. Protection. Captivity. They were two sides of the same coin in his world. My safety was inextricably linked to my confinement, to his control. My chest tightened. My very presence here was a testament to his power, not just over me, but over the intricate web of my entire life. Everything in me screamed no, but some traitorous part of me, weary from fear, whispered a hesitant yes to the offer of sanctuary, however twisted its origin. Over the next few days, a delicate, unspoken ritual began to form. My mornings were dedicated to preparing his medicines, observing his symptoms, recording every nuance of his healing. His strength slowly returned, the feverish haze receding, revealing a man of formidable presence and even more formidable control. He began to move more freely, occasionally standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a dark, imposing silhouette against the city lights. He never touched me directly, not with a deliberate action, but his awareness of me was a constant, palpable force. His gaze followed my movements, a silent, burning presence. I would find his eyes on me as I brewed a tea, as I carefully ground herbs, as I made notes in my journal. It was a gaze that dissected, that absorbed, that seemed to strip away my defenses layer by layer. I tried to maintain my professional detachment, focusing on the intricate puzzle of the poison. My new laboratory was indeed a marvel. Glass beakers, distillation apparatus, centrifuges, a microscope of incredible resolution, all were at my disposal. But it was a lab with no outside line, no window to the world. It was a perfectly equipped cell. One evening, as I leaned over the microscope, examining the crystalline structure of a particular venom-neutralizing extract I was attempting to synthesize, I felt Matteo's presence behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. My breath caught in my throat, a sudden jolt of electricity running down my spine. Fascinating, isn't it? His voice was a low murmur directly behind my ear, sending a shiver through me. The faint scent of his cologne, no longer mingled with the tang of illness, filled my nostrils. His breath, warm and soft, ghosted over my neck. I straightened slowly, turning to face him, forcing myself not to jump. He stood too close, invading my personal space, his imposing height overwhelming. His eyes, now clear and sharp, held a dangerous intelligence, a predatory curiosity. "The architecture of poison is often as complex as the architecture of life," I replied, my voice a little breathless, trying to keep my focus on the science, on the intellectual challenge, rather than the man who loomed over me. His gaze dropped to the microscope, then back to my face. "You see the beauty in destruction. I see the challenge in understanding it," I corrected, my chin lifting in subtle defiance. Only through understanding can healing truly begin. He studied me, his head tilted slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "And you believe you can heal me, Alessia Ricci?" The question wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation, a test of my resolve. "I believe I can neutralize the poison," I said firmly. "Healing is a long process, internal and external." A slow smile, that dangerous, unnerving smile, touched his lips. An honest woman, a rarity in my world. His hand, large and warm, moved, not to touch me, but to rest on the edge of the microscope, inches from my own. The proximity, the sheer, coiled power emanating from him made my skin prickle. "Tell me, Alessia, what do you yearn for in this outside world you claim to miss so dearly?" The question was a direct probing, an intrusion into my internal landscape. It was a trap. Any longing I expressed would only be used as a new chain. "My clinic," I said, meeting his gaze directly. My plants, my quiet. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. Quiet is overrated, and plants, he mused, a faint, almost tender note in his voice, can be brought to you. His gaze lingered on my face, then dropped to my lips. Your father, he is well taken care of. Consider it a testament to your growing value. The implicit threat, the casual way he held my father's life in his hands, was a constant dull ache. He was reminding me subtly that my continued cooperation was his to command. My heart hammered. He was giving me everything I needed to do my work, but meticulously tightening the invisible bonds around me. One morning, after a week in the penthouse, I woke with a sudden, desperate urge to simply to see the outside world, not from a distant window, but up close. To feel the breeze, to smell the city air unfiltered by a closed environment. I yearned for a small act of rebellion, a testing of the unseen boundaries of my luxurious prison. I found one of the junior guards, a young man who looked barely out of his teens, standing sentinel by the elevator. I need to take some fresh air, I stated, my voice calm, authoritative, mimicking the tone I heard Mateo use. For my patient's recovery, fresh air and sunlight are crucial. I need to source some particular plants personally. The young man's eyes, usually blank, flickered with uncertainty. I will have to consult with Don Torrance, ma'am. The Don is sleeping, I countered, drawing on every ounce of my inner strength, projecting an air of unquestionable necessity. This cannot wait. His recovery depends on it. Are you truly prepared to risk his health by delaying such a simple request? The guard hesitated, torn between his orders and the unspoken fear of displeasing his boss, especially when it concerned the Don's fragile health. He knew Mateo valued my skills. My words were a weapon, wielded with surprising effectiveness. Very well, ma'am, he finally conceded, his face still pale. But I must accompany you. And it must be within the building's designated garden area. No further. A designated garden area. It wasn't the open city streets I craved, but it was a victory, however small. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a triumphant flutter in my chest. I had pushed, and the cage had flexed. He led me to a different elevator, one that descended slowly, carrying us to the lower levels of the skyscraper. The doors opened onto an interior courtyard, a breathtaking oasis carved out of the urban concrete. A lush, verdant space, complete with mature trees, bubbling fountains, and carefully curated flower beds. It was beautiful, tranquil, and utterly contained. A high glass dome, almost imperceptible, arched overhead, allowing sunlight to stream in, but separating it entirely from the world beyond. I stepped out, taking a deep, fortifying breath. The air, though recycled, was fresh, imbued with the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. It was a mockery of true freedom, but a delicious taste nonetheless. I walked among the plants, my fingers tracing the delicate petals of a camellia, the rough bark of a sycamore, my scientific mind engaged, identifying, appreciating. The guard followed a discreet distance behind, his presence a constant reminder of my true status. I found myself drawn to a secluded corner, where a cluster of ivy grew over a low stone wall. My eyes scanned the area, noting the perfect symmetry of the landscaping, the lack of a single fallen leaf. It was too perfect, then I saw it. Tucked discreetly into the foliage of the ivy, almost completely hidden by a particularly dense cluster of leaves, was a tiny, glinting lens. A camera, small, expertly concealed, but unmistakable. My heart gave a sickening lurch. My gaze swept around the garden. Another glint, this time in the eye of a carved stone angel. Another, subtly positioned within the shimmering spray of a fountain. They were everywhere, watching, listening. The walls of my cage weren't just physical. They were invisible, insidious, monitoring my every breath, my every move. The freedom I had just secured, the victory over the young guard, was an illusion. Mateo hadn't simply granted my request. He had allowed me a carefully orchestrated outing, a perfectly controlled experiment within his gilded prison. He had known all along what I would find, and he had wanted me to find it. My stomach plummeted. I wasn't just under his protection. I was under his constant, inescapable surveillance. And if I had made this discovery so easily, what other, more terrifying secrets did this penthouse hold? The thought sent a cold dread through me. colder than any fear I had felt before. The man I was healing, the man whose dark, possessive eyes followed my every move, was not just a crime lord. He was a master manipulator, and I was merely a specimen in his meticulously controlled environment. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate bird trapped in a cage from which there was truly no escape. The camera lens, a cold, unblinking eye, seemed to watch my every breath, every tremor of my hand as I feigned an interest in a particularly hardy fern. My victory had evaporated into a bitter jest. My cage was not just physical, but a sophisticated web of surveillance, designed to lull me into a false sense of security while meticulously cataloging my actions. The insidious nature of it churned my stomach. Mateo Torrance hadn't simply granted me a reprieve. He had merely extended the walls of his prison, cloaking them in the illusion of freedom. The realization solidified a new, colder resolve within me. If he was to be a master of observation, I would become a master of disguise, my thoughts guarded, my intentions veiled. I would use the tools he provided, the gilded cage he constructed, to carve out a space for my own survival and for my father's. Over the ensuing days, a strange, potent rhythm established itself between us. Mateo's recovery, though slow, was undeniable. The fever broke entirely, leaving his skin smooth, cool to the touch when I pressed my palm to his forehead. His eyes, now clear as polished obsidian, followed my every movement, a silent, consuming heat. He began to move with a predatory grace, occasionally rising from the bed to pace the vast room, his presence a dark, potent force that pulled the air taut around him. The subtle physicality the plot summary demanded became an almost unbearable pressure. He never touched me with purpose. Not yet. But his proximity was a constant brush against my consciousness. I'd find him standing too close as I prepared a decoction, his breath warm on my neck, the clean scent of his skin an expensive cologne an intoxicating distraction. Or his hand, large and shadowed, would rest on the back of my chair for a beat too long, an accidental claim. My own internal landscape was a battleground. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to maintain a clinical distance, to view him only as a patient, a puzzle. Yet when I saw the flash of raw pain in his eyes during a particularly bad residual tremor, or the way his jaw would clench, silently fighting the last vestiges of the poison's agony, a traitorous empathy stirred within me. He was a monster, yes, but a wounded one, and the healer in me was drawn to the broken thing. He saw my hands, my skill, but I saw the relentless will that still beat beneath the surface of his suffering, a darkness that fascinated as much as it terrified. My laboratory became my sanctuary, a space where I could channel my terror and frustration into the methodical pursuit of knowledge. The rare herbs, the sophisticated equipment, the endless supply of chemicals. He had indeed provided everything. I spent hours poring over reference texts, running tests, isolating compounds. The cyanide component of the poison was complex, slow-acting, designed not for an immediate kill but for prolonged agonizing incapacitation, weakening the victim while preserving their faculties, just enough to comprehend their impending demise. A truly cruel design, I mused, a reflection of the venom's source. One afternoon, a crucial piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I had been analyzing the residual toxins in a blood sample Mateo had provided, searching for a specific enzyme signature. I discovered a trace element, an unexpected botanical compound, something rare and distinct from the primary cyanide agent. It was a derivative of oleander, a plant typically used as a cardiac stimulant in minute doses, but devastatingly toxic in larger concentrations, accelerating cardiac strain. What struck me was not just its presence, but the way it was delivered. It wasn't ingested. It was a slow-release compound, almost certainly dermal, applied over time. But where? My mind raced. Mateo's doctors had been baffled by the persistent cardiac strain even after the initial cyanide treatment. This oleander derivative, applied externally, would explain it. But who would have prolonged, intimate access to him, capable of administering a slow dermal poison? Someone close, someone trusted. My active choice formed then, a fragile seed of defiance sprouting in the sterile confines of the lab. This information, this botanical fingerprint, was more than just a medical breakthrough. It was a strategic weapon. Mateo's conventional security and intelligence network, formidable as it was, had missed this. My unique skill, my botanical knowledge, had uncovered a blind spot. I walked back to Mateo's suite, my pulse thrumming with a mix of fear and exhilaration. He sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city a glittering tapestry behind him, the tablet a familiar fixture in his hands. His jaw was tight, his brows drawn together in a line of deep concentration. The air around him felt charged, thick with unspoken tension. Over the past few days, I had noticed the subtle shifts in his demeanor. Phone calls taken with hushed urgency, the increasing frequency of Anton's quiet entrances and exits, the shadow of a new, harder edge in Mateo's usually controlled gaze. The external threat, whatever it was pressing in. "Don Torrance," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I have made a significant discovery regarding the poison." He looked up, his eyes dark and sharp, impaling me. He didn't speak, but his stillness was more commanding than any shouted word. "The primary agent is indeed cyanide-based, but there's a secondary compound. A derivative of oleander. It's been accelerating the cardiac damage." I paused, letting that sink in, and it wasn't ingested. It was a dermal application, slowly administered over time. His eyes narrowed, a muscle jumping in his jaw. The implication, unspoken but clear, hung between us. Someone close to him. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. "Absolutely," I affirmed, meeting his gaze without flinching. "The enzyme signature is unmistakable. It's why the cardiac strain persisted. Someone had prolonged, intimate access to you. Someone you trusted." He rose slowly, his towering frame casting a long shadow over me. He walked towards the window, his back to me, his silence more terrifying than any outburst. I watched the subtle tension in his shoulders, the coiled power in his posture. He was processing, calculating. The walls of his fortress, I realized, were compromised from within. "Anton," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet carrying an icy precision that froze my blood. "Bring me the list." Anton, who seemed to materialize from the shadows at the sound of his name, nodded once, his eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement of my revelation. He returned moments later with a small, leather-bound notebook. Mateo took it, his gaze sweeping over the names within. His eyes landed on one particular entry, and a cold fury, silent and absolute, emanated from him. "Leonardo," he murmured. The name a poisoned whisper. "My head of security. A man I've known since childhood." His voice held no grief, only a terrible, devastating clarity. "He's been skimming for months," I suspected. "But this—" He turned, his eyes burning into mine, a raw, primal intensity blazing in their depths. "This is a declaration of war." He slammed the notebook shut, the sound echoing in the opulent silence. The information I had given him wasn't just a medical insight. It was a devastating betrayal, a direct threat from his inner circle. And I, an outsider, had uncovered it. My courage in revealing it had shifted something between us. A new layer of respect, a dangerous, unspoken acknowledgement of my strategic value. Suddenly, the hushed calm of the penthouse shattered. A series of rapid, muffled thuds shook the building, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire, close, terrifyingly close. The sounds weren't from the street. They were within the building, a violation of the fortress itself. Mateo moved with impossible speed, a blur of dark tailored cloth. He grabbed my arm, his grip strong enough to bruise, pulling me roughly behind a massive mahogany desk. The sheer force of his movement took my breath away. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent growl, his body a formidable shield between me and the sounds of chaos. More gunfire erupted, louder this time, accompanied by the crash of breaking glass. Footsteps, heavy and frantic, pounded in the corridor outside. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. My carefully constructed composure evaporated in an instant, replaced by a visceral, all-consuming terror. Mateo pulled a silenced pistol from beneath his jacket, its black steel gleaming lethally in the dim light. He moved to the edge of the desk, his body low, his eyes scanning the reinforced door, his every muscle coiled, ready to strike. This was not the sick, vulnerable man I had been tending. This was the Dawn, the predator, stripped bare of pretense, operating on pure, deadly instinct. A sudden, violent explosion ripped through the air, directly outside his suite. The doors splintered inward, torn from their hinges, revealing a torrent of armed men in tactical gear, pouring into the room. They weren't just goons. They were well-trained, efficient, their movements coordinated. Leonardo, pale and sweating, stood behind them, his face a mask of desperate ambition. "Matteo!" Leonardo's voice was hoarse, triumphant. "It's over. The poison was just a prelude. Your empire falls tonight." Matteo didn't reply. He fired. 2 quick, precise shots, dropping 2 of Leonardo's men before they could even raise their weapons. The smell of gunpowder, sharp and metallic, filled the air, mingling with the sickeningly familiar scent of blood. The room erupted into a whirlwind of gunfire and shouts. I huddled behind the desk, pressing myself against the cold wood, every fiber of my being screaming for escape. But there was nowhere to go. My eyes darted to Matteo. He was a force of nature, moving with brutal efficiency. But the sheer numbers were overwhelming. A bullet ricocheted off the wall near him, and he flinched, a spasm of pain crossing his face. The poison, I realized with a fresh wave of dread, still had a hold on his body. He wasn't fully recovered. He was fighting a war on 2 fronts, against the assassins and against his own weakened flesh. A large, hulking man lunged at Matteo, a wicked-looking blade glinting in his hand. Matteo met him, a blur of motion, but the fight was brutal, close quarters. He parried a blow, then another, his movements showing signs of fatigue, of the lingering effects of the toxin. For a split second, his guard dropped, and the blade grazed his arm, a dark stripe blossoming on his expensive white shirt. A low grunt escaped him, a primal sound of pain and frustration. My medical instincts, honed over years, took over. My eyes swept the room, searching, assessing. A heavy, antique bronze letter opener lay on Matteo's desk, solid and pointed. My heart pounded. Everything in me screamed no, but some traitorous part, the part that had witnessed his pain, his grim fight, made a choice. Without thinking, I grabbed the letter opener. My hands were shaking, but a cold resolve settled over me. As the hulking man raised his blade for a final, decisive strike, his back momentarily turned to me. I moved. I lunged forward, not aiming for a kill, but for a distraction, a momentary reprieve for Matteo. I plunged the point of the letter opener into the fleshy part of the man's exposed calf. A roar of pain tore from the assailant's throat. He stumbled, his focus broken. It was all the opening Matteo needed. He moved with a savage grace, disarming the man with a brutal efficiency, then slamming him against the wall with a sickening thud. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Matteo turned, his eyes wild and dangerous, finding me. His gaze swept over my trembling form, then to the letter opener still clutched in my hand, then back to my face. A profound shock, quickly replaced by something akin to fierce approval, blazed in their depths. The fighting raged around us, but for a single breathless moment, the world narrowed to just the 2 of us. "You're bleeding," I whispered, my voice thick with adrenaline, gesturing to his arm. He glanced down as if surprised. A scratch. His eyes, however, were still fixed on mine, the raw intensity almost unbearable. "You have courage, Alessia Ricci, more than I gave you credit for." He didn't thank me. He didn't need to. The unspoken communication, the sheer force of his gaze was enough. He saw me, truly saw me, as more than a healer, more than a pawn. In that moment of shared, visceral danger, a new alliance, forged in blood and fire, solidified between us. The firefight began to turn. Anton and his men, alerted by the initial explosion, burst into the room from another entrance, their weapons blazing. They were efficient, ruthless. Leonardo's men were quickly overwhelmed, cornered, disarmed. The air gradually cleared of the acrid smell of gunpowder, replaced by the metallic tang of blood and the faint, unsettling sweetness of the dying oleander. Matteo, though still breathing heavily, his arm bleeding steadily, stood tall amongst the fallen. He was the king, even in a compromised castle. He surveyed the carnage, his face grim, his eyes assessing. Then his gaze found Leonardo, cowering amongst his captured men. "Take him," Matteo commanded, his voice cold as Arctic ice, "and ensure he experiences the full measure of his betrayal." Slowly. Anton nodded, dragging the terrified Leonardo away. Matteo then turned to me, his expression unreadable. My thanks, Alessia. Your insights and your quick thinking were invaluable. He paused, his eyes sweeping over my face, lingering on my trembling lips. You truly are wasted on plants. The fighting ceased, the remaining assassins either dead or disarmed. The penthouse was a wreck, but the dawn was alive. I stood amidst the chaos, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the letter opener still heavy in my hand. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving me weak and trembling. Matteo took a step closer, his eyes still burning with an intensity that promised both danger and a strange, potent protection. Come, he said, his voice softer now, almost tender, yet still commanding. You are safe. He reached for me, not to command, but to lead. His hand, large and warm, closed around my wrist, the same wrist he had clutched in his fever. This time there was no desperation, only a possessive claim. He pulled me gently but firmly towards him, guiding me through the debris-strewn room, past the bodies and the blood. His presence was a solid, unyielding anchor in the storm's aftermath. He led me not back to his bedroom, but to a hidden, smaller chamber, clearly a personal refuge. It was sparsely furnished, dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the opulence of the main suite. He released my wrist, then pulled a small bottle of antiseptic from a hidden compartment. He cleaned the superficial cut on his arm, his movements economical, his eyes never leaving mine. The antidote is almost complete, I stated, my voice still a little shaky, but my professional mask firmly back in place. I can finish it tonight. The oleander derivative complicated things, but now that I know what I'm dealing with, I can synthesize a counteragent. He nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Good. My network is already moving against Leonardo's confederates. They will pay dearly. He paused, then his eyes, dark and mesmerizing, fixed on mine. But the threat is not entirely eliminated. This was a direct assault, Alessia. A statement. They know you are important to my survival. They will come for you. My blood ran cold. The quiet, intimate refuge suddenly felt like another trap. He wasn't just stating a fact. He was laying bare the terrifying truth of my new reality. My connection to him, my very value, had made me a target. My healing touch, which had saved his life, had simultaneously marked me for death. Just then, a faint, almost imperceptible click sounded from the hidden door of the chamber. Matteo's head snapped up, his body tensing, his eyes narrowing. He moved, quicker than I could react, shoving me behind him, his body once again a protective wall. The heavy wooden door, cleverly concealed in the wall paneling, swung inward with a soft creak. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor. It wasn't one of Matteo's men. It was a woman, slight and elegant, her face obscured by shadow, but in her hand, glinting dully, was a small, wickedly sharp blade. Her eyes, cold and utterly devoid of mercy, fixed not on Matteo, but on me. The glinting blade in the woman's hand was my first stark warning. Her eyes, frigid chips of ice, fixed on me, not Matteo. My breath caught, a cold, sharp shard in my throat. This was no random assassin. This was personal. Matteo's body, still slightly weakened but coiled with lethal readiness, shoved me further behind him, an immovable wall of muscle and protective fury. The air thickened, charged with a new, terrifying static. Matteo. The woman's voice was a soft, dangerous purr, laced with an unnerving calm. How many times have I warned you against weakness? Her gaze flickered, dismissive and scornful, over my huddled form, then back to him. And this is what you cling to? A healer? A broken man needs no fragile flower. Matteo didn't speak. His silence was a weapon, more potent than any shouted threat. He moved, shifting his weight, his eyes never leaving hers. The silenced pistol, still in his hand, seemed to hum with contained violence. My mind raced, assessing, analyzing. The woman was small, but her stance radiated lethal intent, a coiled spring. Her focus was on Matteo, but her primary objective, I realized with a sickening lurch, was me. She considered me his weakness, a vulnerability to exploit. You speak of weakness, Isabella. Matteo's voice was a low growl, devoid of any warmth. But it is you who brings this chaos into my home. Isabella. The name was familiar. whispered in hushed tones amongst the few hushed conversations I'd overheard. Mateo's estranged cousin, a dangerous rival in the city's underworld, rumored to be as beautiful as she was ruthless. Isabella lunged, not directly at Mateo, but in a fluid, deceptive arc that aimed to bypass him, straight for me. Her blade flashed, a silvery whisper of death. Mateo reacted instantly, intercepting her with a savage roar, his body a blur of defensive power. Their struggle was a whirlwind of controlled brutality, the small chamber suddenly too small for their combined fury. Metal clashed against metal as Mateo's pistol, now a bludgeon, met her blade. The sounds were guttural, primal, a symphony of violence that curdled my blood. I scrambled back, pressing myself into the cool stone of the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was a botanist, a healer, utterly useless in this brutal dance, but the words, "fragile flower," echoed in my mind, igniting a spark of defiant rage. I wouldn't be a passive victim. My eyes darted around the small private chamber, a polished bronze statuette, a heavy crystal decanter, a small, intricate tapestry, nothing I could wield effectively. Then, my gaze fell upon the small, ornate chest on Mateo's bedside table, where I had seen him keep vials of a strong, almost scentless sedative I'd occasionally use to help him sleep during his worst pain. It was a muscle relaxant, powerful enough to temporarily incapacitate. My hands, still trembling, shot out, snatching the small vial. Mateo grunted, a sharp intake of breath, as Isabella's blade grazed his side. The lingering effects of the poison, the earlier fight with Leonardo's men, were taking their toll. He was strong, but he was faltering. My professional instinct, my scientific mind, screamed at me. I couldn't stand by. This woman wanted to eliminate me as Mateo's weakness. I would prove to be his strength. With a surge of desperate resolve, I uncorked the vial, holding the potent liquid. Isabella, locked in a fierce embrace with Mateo, her back briefly exposed, was still struggling to reach me. This was my chance. I launched myself forward not with grace, but with raw desperation. I didn't have time to be precise. I aimed the open vial, a crude but potent weapon, at the general area of Isabella's head, squeezing it. The clear liquid splashed across her face, some catching in her open mouth as she gasped from the exertion of the struggle. Isabella froze, her movements suddenly jerky, her eyes wide with shock. A strange, almost glazed look came over them. The powerful sedative, absorbed through mucous membranes and taste buds, was working rapidly. Her blade clattered to the floor, her grip loosening on Mateo. Her body went slack, collapsing against him, a dead weight. Mateo caught her, his face grim, his breathing harsh. He tossed her unceremoniously to the floor, then turned to me, his eyes blazing. A mix of fury and something else. A possessive, undeniable admiration. "Alessia," he rasped, his voice raw, his eyes sweeping over my trembling form. Then to the empty vial still clutched in my hand. He saw the cold logic in my desperate act, the sharp intelligence beneath my fear. He saw a kindred spirit, capable of ruthlessness when pushed. My legs gave way, and I slid down the wall, gasping for breath, the adrenaline draining from me, leaving me weak and hollow. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the vial. I had just incapacitated a woman who meant to kill me. The sheer audacity of my action, the cold resolve that had allowed me to act, was terrifying. Mateo knelt before me, his eyes never leaving mine. His hand, large and warm, reached out, cupping my jaw. His touch, usually a silent claim, now held a tremor, an uncharacteristic vulnerability. His gaze was dark, intense, burning with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher, a primal mix of fury, relief, and something dangerously close to reverence. "You could have been killed," he murmured, his voice rough, thick with an unspoken fear. "Why?" "She was going for me," I whispered, my voice still unsteady. "And you? You were tiring." I met his gaze, my chin lifting in a gesture of defiance, of truth. "I wouldn't let her take you from me, not after all this." The confession, raw and unbidden, hung in the air between us. It wasn't about my father anymore, not entirely. It was about him, my unexpected protector, my complicated captor, the man I had inexplicably come to need. His eyes widened slightly, absorbing my words, seeing past the panic to the fierce protectiveness that had driven my actions. A muscle jumped in his jaw, his fingers tightening on my face. "Not after all this," he repeated, the words a low, possessive rumble. "No, not after all this." He leaned closer, his scent, smoke, metal, and his own unique masculine aroma filling my senses. His gaze dropped to my lips, lingering there, a silent promise of what was to come. The unspoken tension that had simmered between us for days, a low thrum beneath the surface of medical duty and forced proximity, suddenly flared into an inferno. "The poison was nothing," he confessed, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, imbued with a raw, undeniable vulnerability compared to the agony of your silence. "Stay." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, shattering the last vestiges of my resistance. Stay. Not a demand, but a plea, stripped bare of all artifice. It was the crack in his formidable armor, the glimpse of the man beneath the monster, vulnerable and utterly exposed. Everything in me screamed that this was madness, that his world was deadly, that this man was chaos embodied. But some traitorous part, the part that had watched him fight, seen his pain, tasted his desperation, whispered a fervent, undeniable yes. My own yearning, long suppressed, surged to the surface. I wanted to stay. I wanted to unravel the complexities of this dangerous man. I wanted to be the anchor to his hurricane, the quiet strength that commanded his violent loyalty. He watched my face, reading my inner turmoil, seeing the conflict warring in my eyes. Then slowly, with an almost imperceptible shift, he moved. His lips, dry and slightly bruised from the fight, found mine. The kiss was not gentle. It was a raw, primal claiming, tasting of fear and adrenaline, of blood and desperation, of medicine and shared survival. It was fierce and bruising, a culmination of all the unspoken tension, all the simmering desire, all the terror and relief of the past weeks. His hand moved from my jaw, tangling in my hair, pulling me closer, deepening the kiss until my head swam. My body, still trembling, ignited under his touch, responding with a fierce, answering hunger I never knew I possessed. He broke the kiss, dragging a ragged breath, his forehead resting against mine. His eyes, dark as midnight pools, were impossibly close, reflecting the chaotic intensity of the moment. "Mine," he whispered, the word a possessive growl that vibrated through my very bones. "You are mine, Alessia." My answer wasn't a word, but a movement. I leaned into him, letting the full weight of my fear, my exhaustion, and my own potent desire anchor me against his powerful frame. My fingers, still stained with the lingering scent of herbs and antiseptic, curled into the expensive fabric of his shirt, clinging to him. The line had been crossed. There was no going back. He lifted me effortlessly into his arms. The transition was so smooth, so natural, it felt like an inevitability. He carried me, not to his bed, which was still littered with the debris of a war zone, but further into the hidden chamber, to a simpler, more private space. A large plush sofa, dark and inviting. He laid me down, then followed, his weight settling over me, pinning me gently, deliciously. Our clothes were still stained with the grime of battle, our bodies humming with the residue of violence, but it only intensified the raw, animalistic need that consumed us. His hands, rough but tender, found the buttons of my shirt, his gaze never leaving mine, asking permission without words. My own hands, less certain but driven by an undeniable impulse, fumbled with the clasp of his belt. The first time was not a slow seduction. It was a hungry, desperate claiming, emerging born of survival and raw, undeniable need. It was a physical manifestation of souls already fused in the crucible of his illness and our shared peril. His skin was hot against mine, his breath ragged, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that stole my own breath. Every touch, every kiss, every thrust was a whisper of his possessive devotion, a promise of his unwavering protection, and a desperate plea for my continued presence. I met his hunger with my own, shedding the inhibitions of a lifetime, surrendering to a passion so fierce it bordered on pain. My body, which had known only the precise, controlled movements of a botanist, now writhed with an ancient primal rhythm, guided by his powerful hands, his knowing lips. He was the hurricane, and I was the earth, yielding, absorbing, becoming entwined. When the climax hit, it was a shattering, all-consuming explosion, leaving us both breathless, irrevocably changed, two fractured pieces finally finding their devastating whole. I woke to the soft, diffused light of dawn filtering through a hidden skylight. My body ached, a delicious, lingering soreness that was a testament to the intensity of the night. Mateo was beside me, his arm a heavy, warm band across my waist, pulling me close. His breath stirred the hair at my temple. He was still asleep, his face in repose. The formidable lines softened, revealing a startling vulnerability I had only glimpsed in his fever. I traced the curve of his jaw, the faint stubble rough against my fingertip. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, dark and heavy-lidded. His gaze found mine, clear and sharp, a possessive warmth radiating from their depths. "Alessia," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep, the sound a low rumble in his chest. His arm tightened, pulling me even closer, pressing my back against the hard planes of his front. "Good morning, Mia Cara." The endearment, whispered with such tender possessiveness, sent a shiver through me. This was the man who had ordered brutal retribution, who controlled a city with an iron fist. Yet in these private moments, he was utterly devoted, utterly mine. The contrast was intoxicating, dangerously addictive. Later that morning, after Mateo had seen to the disposal of Isabella and the remaining loose ends of Leonardo's betrayal with a terrifying, efficient ruthlessness, he returned to the private chamber. He had showered, dressed in a fresh, impeccably tailored suit, and the casual cruelty I'd witnessed earlier had returned, a cold, formidable mask. He was the Don once more, but when his eyes found mine, a different emotion, something soft and possessive, flickered beneath the hard surface. He watched me as I moved, gathering my scattered thoughts, trying to regain some semblance of my old composure, my clinic, my quiet life. They felt like distant echoes now. "The antidote is complete," I announced, my voice steady, professional, despite the tremor in my hands. "You are recovered, Don Torrance." He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Thanks to you, Alessia." He walked over to the windows, gazing out at the sprawling city, a picture of power and contemplation. "The threat has been neutralized. Leonardo and his confederates will be dealt with. Isabella was a more formidable opponent, but her ambition blinded her." He paused, then turned, his eyes dark and piercing, locking onto mine. "You saved me, Alessia. Not just my life, but my empire. My life owes you a debt that cannot be repaid." My heart hammered. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Would he finally let me go? Release me from this gilded cage now that I had served my purpose? He stepped closer, closing the distance between us until he stood before me, his towering height overwhelming, his presence a palpable force. His hands, large and scarred, reached out, not to touch, but to offer. He held out two distinct sets of papers. "I promised your father's debt would be repaid," he began, his voice low, measured. "These are documents securing his financial future, establishing a generous trust in his name, fully funded. He will want for nothing for the rest of his days." He gestured to the first set of papers. "And these," he continued, his eyes unwavering, "are travel documents, a new identity, passage to anywhere in the world you desire. Money, resources, a quiet life of your own, far from my world, far from this city. You will be free, Alessia. Truly free." My breath hitched. He was offering me everything I had once craved. Safety, freedom, a return to my quiet life, a secure future for my father. It was a true choice, untainted by immediate threat or coercion. He was giving me the out. Everything in me, the terrified botanist, the woman who yearned for peace, screamed to take it, to run. But then I looked into his eyes, those dark, fathomless pools that had watched my every move, seen my defiance, witnessed my courage, and felt my touch. I remembered the fierce possessiveness of his kiss, the desperate intimacy of our shared night, the raw vulnerability in his plea. "Stay." My gaze dropped to the second set of papers, then back to his face. He watched me, his expression unreadable, yet I sensed the fierce, desperate hope coiled beneath his controlled exterior. He had given me a choice, yes, but he craved my refusal. "And if I do not take them?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet holding a new steel-like resolve. A flicker of something akin to triumph, quickly masked, crossed his features. Then, he said, his voice dropping, husky with a possessive tenderness that sent shivers through me. You stay. Not as my captive, Alessia, but as my partner, my mistress, my consigliere. My head snapped up, my eyes wide with shock. Consigliere, his most trusted advisor. It was an unprecedented move, unheard of in his world, a position of immense power and dangerous influence. My organization, he explained, his gaze unwavering, needs your mind, your calm intelligence to balance my storm, your unique perspective, your ability to see what others miss. And I, he confessed, his voice dropping lower, more intimately, I need you, your counsel, your touch, your fierce heart. I cannot function without you, Alessia. You are my anchor, my sanctuary, the woman who saw my weakness and healed it, not exploited it. He stepped closer, reaching out, his hand gently cupping the back of my neck, his thumb stroking my skin, sending a jolt through me. By healing my body, you unknowingly captured my soul. Make no mistake, Mia Cara, this is not a gentle world, but with me, by my side, you will be untouchable, the most powerful woman in this city, because you command the heart of the man who controls everything. My internal conflict raged, fierce and profound. The danger, the ruthlessness, the endless complexities of his dark empire. It was all terrifying. But then I remembered the terror of my old life, the fear of losing my father, the profound sense of powerlessness. And in Matteo's world, with Matteo, I had found a strange, undeniable strength. I had found my own ruthlessness, my own capacity for decisive action. I had found him. My heart, once so carefully guarded, now beat with a wild, untamed rhythm, inextricably linked to his. This was not the life I had planned, but it was the life that had claimed me, body and soul. This was where I belonged. I reached up, my trembling fingers tracing the harsh line of his jaw, the faint stubble rough beneath my touch. My eyes met his, bright with a newfound clarity, a fierce, unwavering determination. I choose you, Don Torrance, I declared, my voice steady, imbued with a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I choose this world, I choose this life, and I choose to claim you, as you have claimed me. A slow, dangerous smile, full of triumph and profound relief, spread across his lips, transforming his formidable features into something breathtakingly sensual. He lowered his head, his lips brushing mine. A silent promise of an eternity of twisted devotion, of consuming passion, of a dark, beautiful future, forged in fire and absolute, unyielding love. My heart, finally at peace, knew I had made the only choice I could.